that had encountered these cities. And they described how elaborate their clothing was and their culture, their agriculture. And so then when the next expedition went back, there was no one there because they had killed everybody with diseases.
Forests hide convoluted and shocking secrets within them. It is only a matter of who stumbles upon them. While our home is majestically vast, most of it remains unexplored. Who would dare to take a peek into the uncharted territory that safeguards the most terrifying discoveries? From a hidden treasure to lost cities, jungles possess the deepest and darkest secrets of human civilization. Join us as we explore the uncovering of the 15 most terrifying discoveries made in forests. Number 1, the lost city of Z. People have written books on it. There are movies depicting its enigma. And finally, even Joe Rogan has talked about it. The mystery of the lost city of Z dates back to 1925, when British soldier Percy Fawcett set out on a mission to find an advanced indigenous civilization in Brazil, who he believed to be complex and advanced. Percy had embarked to Brazil alongside his son Jack and his best friend Raleigh, and he had left only one instruction. If the explorers suffered their fate, no one was to come to rescue them. Before 1925, Percy had taken other expeditions to the Amazon, where he had found an elaborate culture of the indigenous peoples, their distinct language, lifestyle, and clothing. But he was convinced that even a systematic effort to wipe out the natives hadn't killed the citizens of Zed. Instead, they were skillful and honed their mastery of surviving skills to fight off any attempts at eradication. The tribe, like many other Amazonian factions, was uncontacted though. Only Percy had figured out that this tribe was actually a remnant of an ancient Amazon civilization that had barely survived. In the events leading to the 1925 expedition, Percy described sightings of bizarre animals that were never recorded by zoology records. He had reported seeing a dog with 2 noses, a cat-like dog looking like a foxhound, and a giant Apazauca spider that had poisoned the locals to their deaths. The soldier knew that his reports were being doubted, so he wanted to discover the lost city himself. But after his last correspondence in May 1925, Percy lost contact. His Brazilian guides, his son, and Jack's best friend Raleigh were nowhere to be found. Percy had informed his wife that he was going to an unexplored territory, but overall seemed optimistic. It is suspected that they were either killed by a native tribe or they got lost and died of starvation. There have been multiple lethal attempts at finding the lost entourage, but so far the findings of the expedition and the strange deaths remain a mystery. But that doesn't mean we are largely unaware of what might have happened. Thinkers like Joe Rogan have suggested that there might have been a sinister attempt at wiping off the civilizations because they were perceived to be more civil and sophisticated than their European counterparts. For long, the old continent had believed that indigenous tribes in the Amazon were savages and rogue. That's when Europe's civilizing mission was at its apex. Now they couldn't have tolerated one of their own exposing the sophistication of a native tribe, could they? But now a photo album consistent with Percy's findings has proven that he had indeed met an uncontacted tribe deep in the forest. Those photos possess details that the explorer had described after surviving multiple voyages to the deep end. Number 2, Camazotz. Some 2,500 years ago, before DC Comics could even introduce us to Batman, the Mayan civilization was worshipping a god with the body of a man, the head of a bat, with pointy ears. Even this ambiguous description can tell you that his Hispanic deity, who took his roots in the jungle, awfully resembled the Dark Knight. He was called the Camazotz. According to sources, Camazotz comes from 2 ancient Maya words, camo, which means death, and satz, which is translated as bat. Few Mayan codices describe the murderous bat god as the master of mysteries, life, and death. Even though he's a relatively unknown name in Mayan mythology, he was still worshipped by a considerable number of people. The worship of Camazotz dates back to around 200 BC, and it is believed that the Zapotecs of Oaxaca in Mexico were the first ones to worship Camazotz. Archaeologists have found evidence that Zapotecs used to worship a monster that had the body of a man and the head of a bat. While Mayans believed Camazotz brought power and life, Zapotecs associated their monster with night, death, and sacrifice. It is true that the origins of this godly figure were sinister and evil, but as the word of the deity passed on to the Mayans living in the jungles of Guatemala and Honduras, they worshipped him as a god. Unlike Zapotecs, they saw the good in Camazots as he closely resembled their god of fire, Zotzilaha Chamocan. There are multiple sources of tribes living in Guatemala and Brazil worshipping a similar-looking god in the present day. Number 3. Lake Hillier. Navigator and cartographer Matthew Flinders was on an exploration mission in modern Western Australia in 1802 when he discovered something shocking. He was convinced what he was seeing was poison, or a deception to betray human eyes. What he could see was surely a water body, a rather small lake that had an odd-colored water. Unlike what he had ever seen, the water appeared to be pink. Matthew was brave enough to take samples from the weird-looking lake, and later he mentioned its existence in his journals. At the same time, he was mesmerized by the beauty of it. After all, when have you seen a natural water body looking pink? Today, the lake is known as Hillier Lake, and it is located on Middle Island, off the coast of Western Australia. The smaller water body is 600 meters long and 250 meters wide. From the surface, the water doesn't appear to be pink. This is why many tourists believe that Hillier is a major deception. However, as you see the lake from above, you can't miss its vibrant pink color. You can even fill a glass of water at the lakeside and you'll see its unique pink hues. And nope, the water isn't poisonous either. In fact, it is perfectly fine to swim in the Hillier if you're willing to make that long, tiring journey. You see, the lake is in a remote location and perhaps not worth the trouble. It is also unclear why the lake is pink. Some scientists believe it is because the lake has Dunaliella salina microalgae, which produces a pink or red-type pigment. The other explanation tells us that the lake has halophilic bacteria in its salt crust, turning the water pink. No matter what the reason is, it is hard to miss the beauty and the enigma of the lake. Number 4. The poisonous plant. Curious and convoluted, the curare plant found in South America is a killer, quite literally. It emerged in the 16th century when South America began producing coca, chocolate, and quinine. Like several plants from the continent, it was its extract that had started to make waves for quite nefarious reasons. Believe it or not, around the First World War, this plant had a key role in the assassination plot of Prime Minister George Lloyd. However, the poisonous plant first became the focus of the Spanish Inquisition of South America. Since the native tribes were no match to the gigantic Spanish forces, they began to lace their arrows with curare to find an edge. When they pelted the Spanish with poisonous arrows, they had no option but to retreat. They were both surprised and horrified. For a 16th century battle, the natives had something powerful in their hands. The soldiers described lethal arrows that paralyzed first and killed later. For the next 300 years, Europeans left no stone unturned to crack the code of the sophisticated weapons, only to realize that they had been defeated by a plant extract. It was only in the 1800s that they came across curare, the magical plant. That's when they realized that they had been scammed again. For centuries, the indigenous tribes had been using the plant for its poisonous nature, as well as its curing abilities. Some of the tribes shared their secrets with the modern world, and that's when we found a muscle relaxant that is now used in invasive surgeries. Yep, curare is both a poison and a healer. Talk about diversity. Number 5. Lost Inca gold. In central Ecuador lies a treasure that is steeped in death, enigma, desire, and conquest. The legend says that in the unforgiving Langanantes mountain ranges that lie between the Andes and the Amazon houses a treasure that men will kill for. This story begins in the 16th century when the mighty Inca Empire in western South America picked a row with the European invaders. It was the Spanish that had caused major havoc in the empire. The Inca king, Atahualpa, was captured by the Spanish commander, Francisco Pizarro. The kingdom fell, but for some reason the commander agreed to release the king if he had a room full of gold. But before the kingdom could arrange and pay the ransom, Pizarro put the king to his death. Atahualpa's followers buried the gold somewhere in a secret mountain cave, fearing that the Spanish would steal their last known treasure. Ever since, many have tried to find the gold, but it was Valverde, a Spaniard, who got access to the treasure. He had married into the Incan family, and his bride led him to the location. Before Valverde could die, he left the directions to the treasure, known as the Derrotero de Valverde. Until the 1850s, no one had heard about the gold rush. When English botanist Richard Spruce traveled to Ecuador in the hopes of finding the cinchona tree, he stumbled upon Valverde's map and guide. Allegedly, treasure seeker Barth Blake was the last one to see the treasure in 1886. According to him, there are thousands of gold and silver pieces of Inca and pre-Inca handicraft, the most beautiful goldsmith works you are not able to imagine. He found life-size human figurines, birds, other animals, flowers, corn stalks, jewelry, golden vases, and more, all made of gold. Unfortunately, soon after Blake collected his little treasure, he was killed. Number 6, the lost city of the monkey god. For centuries, explorers have told the tale of a white lost city that had a spectacular aerial view. However, as time passed away, the city got pushed into the jungle foliage and then it disappeared. Even the indigenous tribes talked about a city that swallowed their people whole. They spoke of a White House, or a place of cacao, where the natives took refuge from their Spanish enemies during the brutal Inquisition. Seeking refuge, their people had gone to a mystical Eden, from which no one returned. The city had disappeared. Since the 1920s, several explorers have sought the White City or Ciudad Blanca. The explorer Theodore Morday made several discoveries in 1940, claiming to enter the city to meet the indigenous people. Although Morday returned with many artifacts, he didn't want to disclose the location. He knew once people figured out the location, they'd want to loot the city. There, the natives had told him that the town used to have a giant statue of a monkey god that would have been visible from an aerial view. But the statue had been buried, so there was no location to get a markup. Before Morday could ever give the location, he died by suicide. Fortunately, all hope wasn't lost. In May 2012, an aerial survey of a remote town in La Mosquitilla revealed a formerly populated area with swamps, rivers, and mountains. 3 years later, the city was recovered from Honduras, revealing an odd past of its former residents. Archaeologists found pyramids, plazas, stone sculptures, earthworks, and other artifacts from the city. However, its past had been lost with its people. Since the city is very under-researched, it is hard for archaeologists to put a story on what they have found. All we know is the city was a safe haven for many. Number 7, the corpse flower. Even its name sounds deadly. Titan arum, or more famously, the corpse flower is not your other romantic artifact. In fact, at first glance, it might not look like a flower at all. You see, it takes up to 6 or 7 years to blossom for the first time. For its second blooming, you might have to wait for 3 years at least. This is why its blossoming is a cultural event, particularly in the rainforest surrounding Sumatra. People gather around to see the flower with their own eyes. But to witness the rare sight, you have to endure something terrible. Its odor mimics burning flesh. The compounds in the flower have a stench similar to rotten cheese, garlic, unwashed and smelly feet, rotten fish, disposed diapers, and even burnt flesh. While the stench is very unattractive, it is important for the flower's survival. Through its odor, the flower attracts carrion beetles and flies for pollination purposes. Its natural heat makes sure that its bad smell reaches the pollinators far, far away, and at times it distracts humans too. Luckily for us, once the flower fully blooms, it will start decaying in 3 days, and you wouldn't have to live with that terrible stench. Number 8, Sun Dung Cave. Did you know Vietnam hosts the largest cave system in the world? And you'll be surprised to know that its discovery was nothing short of a miracle. For ages, it was expected that there would be a cave between Hang En and Hang Thong in Vietnam, but no one was able to find its entrance. What they didn't know was that a local man had already solved the mystery for them, but he wasn't exactly paying attention. Ho Can, born in Quang Binh province in Vietnam, was a lumberjack since he was a teenager. In 1990, in the pursuit of agarwood, he walked deep into the woods without knowing his way out. You see, lumberjack jobs hardly pay well, and Ho knew that agarwood is an expensive plant. But it began to rain heavily, and he had to take refuge in a small cave. He could hear the river running inside, and the cool air kept hitting his face. Yet when the storm subsided, it was time to return home. For years, Ho didn't think about the cave. In 2007, Mr. Howard Limbert and Miss Deb Limbert, leading the members of the British Vietnam Cave Expedition Team, visited Ho's locality in the hopes of finding the caves. They began to interview people who knew the woods at the back of their hands, and it was not a surprise that Ho's name was brought up. That's when he brought up the cave where he heard a roaring river. Unfortunately, it took him a year to locate the caves again, and when he did, he called the expedition team. As soon as Howard Limbert and Ho entered the caves, they couldn't believe their eyes. The cave had its own ecosystem, hidden away from the world. It was Ho who named the cave system Son Dung. Son means mountain, and Dung is the name of the valley where the River Thang comes from. Today, the caves are a popular tourist site in Vietnam. Number 9. Sri Lankan meteorite fossil. Perhaps fallen meteorites are our only way to make contact with the alien civilization. On December 29, 2012, the skies in Sri Lanka flashed with yellow and green flames when a meteor hit our planet. According to researchers, the remnants of the meteor consisted of alien fossilized biological structures. Yep, what fell on Earth was astrobiological life matter, even though the scientists were skeptical at first. Jamie Wallace of Cardiff University and Chandra Wickramasinghe, director of the Buckingham Center for Astrobiology, tested the material comprehensively and found that the meteor fragments have microscopic diatoms, a form of algae. Their research was consistent with this theory called panspermia, an idea that when asteroids travel through space, they spread bits of life and biological matter everywhere they go. The theory was always in the works, but the meteor that fell off in Sri Lankan forest gave us ample proof. It was the law enforcement in Colombo that had collected over 628 samples from the fallen meteor, so it was theorized that perhaps the samples were contaminated. And the algae that scientists had discovered came from Earth and not space. There was a rice paddy near the sample collection spot, and perhaps that's what had clung to the spatial matter. Well, that theory quickly went down the drain. The researchers posited that they had tested each sample with an electron microscope, and their scans had resulted in a number of images showing diatom frustules, some of which were clearly embedded in the rock matrix, thereby excluding the possibility of post-arrival contamination. Plus, the scientists also discovered that their samples had very low levels of nitrogen, meaning the matter was very ancient. That sort of antiquity could only have come from space and not Earth. Years later, the research itself is very disputed, but there is a major chance that was our first ever contact with astrobiological beings, even if they were just plants. For many scientists, including Jamie Wallace and Chandra Wickramasinghe, the research was groundbreaking. Number 10. Orange oak leaf. Butterflies are supposed to be colorful and vibrant. Not orange oak leaf, though. The master of deception looks like an oak leaf with its wings closed. They bask over low foliage and cling to the trees for extended periods of time with no trouble. No ordinary vision can differentiate them from leaves. Surprisingly, they use their vibrant orange and blue wings to escape the predators too. Once they realize that a predator is onto them, they open their upper wings to shock them with a palette of colors. No one sees this move coming. They are mostly found in the jungles of Southeast Asia, particularly in India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. So next time when you see an oak leaf splitting into colors, don't be shocked. Number 11. Alba the albino orangutan. We all know that Bornean orangutans have orangish-brown hair, and they have a very high intelligence. But the scientific world was shocked when they discovered a white-haired orangutan, which was known to be an albino. Such primates are very rare in the world, but there have been instances of an albino gorilla and a spider monkey in Honduras. However, orangutans are particularly very endangered species. There are only a few hundred left in the world, so you can only imagine how rare albino orangutans would be. This is why wildlife advocates were shocked to learn that a man in an Indonesian village had captured an albino orangutan and was holding her as his pet in a cage. After weeks of trying, the orangutan was saved and was named Alba. After giving her the necessary treatment, she was released into the wild, where she is thriving. The road wasn't easy though. The man had no expertise in raising an orangutan, particularly an albino one. It is unclear how the genetic condition changes the animal's behavior, but it is expected that Alba might have had some sensory issues. She was nursed back to health by the Borneo Orangutan Survival Foundation, which hadn't seen a case like this in 25 years of its inception. Alba was their first albino orangutan, and they expect to do more work in saving the endangered species. Number 12. Malaysian giant leaf insect. If you have been to an insectarium, you have probably seen this peculiar creature. The Malaysian giant leaf insects have the ultimate gift of whimsical camouflage. They are so convincing that they sometimes even fool themselves. You see, these insects look a replica of leaves, down from the browning edges to the leaf vein. Their con is so elaborate that they often end up doing accidental cannibalism. Since they eat leaves, they go for a big bite only to realize that they have bitten the next of their kin. Yep, that's one unique problem to have. Eating your family by accident. Even though Malaysian giant leaf insects are low risk on endangered status, they have another pretty unique problem. They don't have enough male species around. The insect itself was discovered in 1984, and it took the scientists another 10 years to stumble on a male counterpart. Their population isn't threatened because female insects lay unfertilized eggs to yield offspring. Number 13. Wolverine frogs. If the slimy creatures give you the ick, you're in for another surprise. In the year 1900, scientists discovered hairy frogs with vicious claws. The discovery was both shocking and confusing, as we had no idea how these bizarre amphibians were growing such sinister tools. It wasn't until after the turn of the millennium that scientists figured out that these hairy frogs did a number on their bones to grow claws to stab their predators. According to IFLS, when aggravated, the hairy frog actively breaks its own toe bones, which then puncture the skin, resulting in a cat-like set of claws, which they can rake across the skin of their aggressor. And you thought typical frogs were scary. It is extremely rare for amphibians to have any claws, and to be fair, if you encountered the wolverine frog, you might not see its claws immediately. When these frogs relax, their claws go back in, and if they are in attack mode, they actively create the claws by breaking their own bones. And you bet those claws hurt. Several experiments show that wolverine frogs can puncture holes in the bodies of their predators or victims, depending on the situation. The bleeding wounds also go pretty deep. Number 14. Jewel caterpillars. Let's be honest. Caterpillars aren't the most fascinating creatures out there. Not jewel caterpillars, though. Known for their beauty, you might want to pick one and hang it around your neck in a gold chain. Yeah, it is that alluring. But that would be a bad decision, of course. These very rare caterpillars are known as the dalcrids, and they would eventually turn into moths. But their behavior is nothing but extraordinary. What you see on the screen is a very zoomed-in picture of these beautiful creatures, but in reality, they are very tiny. They can grow up to half an inch long, and that's about it. This is why they are very difficult to spot. Plus, like their not-so-beautiful counterparts, they are fast on their skin. Maybe even faster. Take your eyes off them and poof, they are gone. And it goes without saying, they are pretty clever too. As you can see, they have these spikes coming off their cuticles. While these spikes are very fragile, they are pretty useful too. When a predator attacks a jewel caterpillar, they hold onto the spikes, which are easily detachable. Once detached, they turn into a jelly-like substance, confusing the predator. It is not foolproof, but it buys the caterpillar to escape. How clever and useful. Guess when you're a tiny little creature in a wild jungle, you need all the help you can get. Number 15. Yoda bat. Star Wars frenzy might not ever die. The character Yoda, the venerable Jedi Master, comes from a galaxy far, far away, but it seems like it has made a permanent home on Earth. In 2017, scientists discovered 2 new species of tarsiers, the small, leaping primates, that had a striking similarity to Yoda. The discovery was so influential that it had started an unconfirmed rumor that perhaps the Jedi Master was based on the tarsier. Like Yoda, these informs between lemurs and monkeys are small, but they are very capable. Inhabiting the island nations of Southeast Asia, these primates were named after the iconic character, when their tube noses became the only distinctive feature to differentiate them from other species. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.